All right, welcome. I want to talk about the Bruins Canucks game that just happened on Thursday night. What was that? February 8th? Was it 2 days ago now? Um, so, Canucks coming in as the top seed in the NHL, whereas the Bruins are number two in the league in terms of standings. Both teams, nobody really expected these two teams to be at the top of the leaderboard coming into this year, including myself. I think I had the Bruins predicted to be in third place in their division, and I think I had the Canucks missing the playoffs or being close. But I think I had them missing the playoffs, so just throwing that out there. This had the feel of a playoff game, which made it extra fun to watch. Bruins won this game 4-0. They were in Boston. Bruins played vintage Bruins hockey, and we'll talk about that on our team play. But the Canucks, they got off to a bit of a slow start in terms of hitting. They tried to play their game, not fall into the Bruins style of play. And that worked for maybe like the first 10 or so minutes of the game. And then they started to have to up their ante on the hitting and kind of get away from what has made them successful throughout this year. I do want to highlight the third line winger of the Canucks, Dakota Joshua. I think he was the absolute best player on the ice for Vancouver. Up and down the ice, defensively responsible, generating offense, being physical, making hits, kind of giving his team a little spark. So I got a couple notes. I didn't take many notes. I think I really took notes within the first 5 minutes of the game and called it because I kind of like to enjoy hockey games when I watch them. Dakota Joshua had a big hit on Brad Marchand, which was clean, but it was good, big, clean hit. He had a breakaway, and he was playing incredible defense in the first at least 5 minutes of the game. His defense throughout the rest of according to my notes, first 5 minutes. The rest of the game, he played very, very responsible defense, which was great to see. So I got to give a shout out to Dakota Joshua, cheap third-line winger who is performing at a rate that I don't think anyone really expected he would. This is an asset for the Vancouver Canucks, and if they look to trade him, he'll definitely have some value. But I don't see them breaking up that third line. That third line's pretty solid, especially when it comes to defensive play. I think it's probably their best defensive line in my opinion. It's obviously a debate, but I want to talk about Quinn Hughes, and that kind of coincides with coaching style as well. So we might skip Demko. Quinn Hughes. Yes, an elite offensive defenseman. He can skate, he can pass, he has the vision, he's got a great shot. I'm trying not to use bad words. Quinn Hughes is an elite offensive defenseman, and a lot of what makes an offensive defenseman elite are those skills, all of which are elite. Now, when it comes to defense, yes, he has improved significantly since his rookie year. He was awful defensively his rookie year. He's still not great, and we saw this against the Bruins. We saw the Bruins exposing Quinn Hughes, getting in behind him, making him chase, giving, which allows a 2-on-1 essentially in front of the net for his defensive partner, Philip Hronik. We saw the Bruins expose this, and I think it seemed to be planned and, I don't remember what it's called. What's the word? Coordinated, pre-planned, game plan. It seems to be a game plan of the Bruins to expose Quinn Hughes, and they did it well defensively. Now offensively, elite. I don't know if there's really I might take Quinn Hughes over Cale Makar offensively. Like, he is absolutely elite offensively. And remember, offense is a form of defense. By playing offense, you're keeping the puck out of your own zone. So remember that too. But Quinn Hughes has definitely hugely benefited from the coaching style, from the coaching change. Now, Bruce Boudreau, the former coach, offensive-minded coach, values defense, values hitting, but to an extent, with him, it's a lot about the offense, and that's fair. It's an offensive league. Rick Tocchet comes in and really, really has to transition this team into thinking defense first. They weren't getting a lot of defense from their forwards. Their defensive group was focusing probably a little too much on offense. But Quinn Hughes, why has he benefited from this coaching change and coaching style and gameplay style of the Canucks? Well, he's getting a lot of help on that defensive side of the puck. He'll skate up. There's at least a centerman right in a spot in front of the net, and sometimes there's a winger for support, right? So Quinn Hughes is able to go and chase some guy to the blue line who passes the puck up, which and still have defensive coverage. So there's, you know, this is why I don't like to watch a lot of hockey games all in night or watch multiple games at the same time. That is my dog wanting to play. I'm sorry, because I feel like you kind of miss these opportunities to follow a player and actually see how they're playing top to bottom. I like, defense is one of those things that are tough to quantify in terms of stats. So I feel like watching my dog is going crazy. Watching the player, watching where they're at, where they're going, in contrast to the team's defensive system and style, really tells you a lot about the player's defensive abilities. And I think it shows. Quinn Hughes, I'd say he defensively below average, and that's okay because offensively, one of the best overall offensive players in the league, not just defensemen but forwards as well. Absolutely elite. Which again, I'll say it again, is a form of defense. So I want to highlight that. Because I've seen this a lot, especially lately. People talk about Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar and how they're not just offensive defensemen, when in reality they are, but they play in a good system that has their behind covered in case they have defensive lapses. So I do want to throw that out there. If you watch these players, you can really tell who's playing defense, who's covering, who's chasing. And Quinn Hughes, not necessarily playing the Vancouver Canucks defensive system, chasing a little bit. Hronik doesn't chase nearly as much. Really, any of the other D guys, none of them chased nearly as much as Quinn Hughes, especially to a point where they were out of position. Most of the defensive players, very defensively responsible, in position, tying up sticks, staying in front of their guys, staying between the net and the offensive player, or staying between the goalie and the offensive player, right? Not necessarily Quinn Hughes, and that's okay. So it's not a knock on Quinn Hughes, but I'm also tired of just hearing everyone say how elite he is in the defensive zone, along with other offensive defensemen in the league. This is just an example because, this is a great game, and I wanted to talk about it because there's a lot to take away from it. But defensive defenseman, offensive defenseman, very different. Two-way defenseman, sort of, I value those as like the unicorn defenseman. We could talk about Victor Hedman, right? Incredible in his own zone, incredible offensively. Roman Josi, I think, is a good example of that. He's a very good defenseman in his own zone. Brock Faber is a defensive defenseman first, who has really developed an offensive scoring touch in his rookie year this year, which wasn't there throughout his entire career, hockey career. So becoming a two-way defenseman is, I think, special and tough, and I think it's a lot of players aren't able to really find that balance, and that's okay. That's okay. Demko, we're moving on. Demko, I think overall played pretty well. This was definitely a down game for him. He wasn't. There were probably a couple saves he would have liked to have back, but overall, he did make some under-the-radar, kind of difficult saves. And in general, he is a very good goaltender. He is going to give you the saves that you need. So I know there's a lot of hate on Demko not giving Jeremy Swayman a hug at the All-Star game, and that's karma and why they lost. But in reality, Demko is one of the more elite goalies in the league. I don't know if I would say the best goalie in the league, but you can definitely make a case for top 5. Maybe, top 7 if you want to really dive into that. I haven't done a goalie ranking list, so I'm not quite sure where I would have him in my rankings just yet. But I do want to talk about coaching style. This team, again, I did not predict the Canucks to make the playoffs this year. They're first overall in the league. Even with this win against Boston, they're still on top of the league. What happened? Well, they have had the offensive pieces. No surprise there. The defensive pieces were okay, but by buying into a team defensive system, that can really put you over the edge. That really prevents a lot of goals, and you can transition that defense to offense. We see this with a lot of teams. I know, but I can't play with you right now. I'm sorry. Just relax. I'll play with you in a bit. This is what we want to see from teams like the Ottawa Senators and the Buffalo Sabres. Bottom of the league teams that have a lot of offensive talent, don't really have a bad defensive core or necessarily bad goaltending, and I'm not diving into that right now. But if their offensive group buys into playing team defense, I think that could be a game changer for both of those teams, as we've seen with the Canucks. And that's why I talk about team defense so much. Again, defensive stats for not just defensemen but forwards are hard to quantify. They are. So it's tough to see who's doing the right things defensively and who really needs to buy in more on the defensive side of the puck. For example, with the Bruins, we've seen Pastrnak buy into that. He's bought into that in the past. That's kind of the Bruins' way, is defensive first hockey. Last year, a bit of an exception for Pastrnak. He goes on this career offensive year, but his defensive play was honestly it was bad. It was atrocious. This year, not so much. He's playing responsible defense. He's not elite, or I wouldn't even say like average, but at least he's making the attempt. He's being present. He's forcing players to pass the puck. He's back checking, which you couldn't really say much of last year for Pastrnak. So just an example in coaching style. I do like. I'm not personally a Rick Tocchet fan, but I don't have any ill wishes towards him. Or I don't think he's like a bad coach. But I think his coaching style and his mentality really transformed this team and organization into a winning organization. And I don't think this is just a one-off year. I think this is sustainable. But that's enough on the Canucks. I want to talk about the Boston Bruins now. Why am I getting text messages? Okay, that is okay. Anyway, Charlie Coyle. This is a guy throughout his entire career who has been given opportunities to be a 1C or a 2C. Given, not necessarily earned. And it has never worked out. Any season, he's almost every season of his career, almost, he's been given an opportunity in the top six to be a centerman, and it has not once worked out, really. He hasn't been horrible, but doesn't really slot in as a 2C, let alone a 1C. This year, he started on that third line. He's earned his promotion. You saw that third line kind of become the second line, and then the wingers kind of become interchangeable, but Charlie Coyle staying on that second line, and then you're seeing him kind of transition into that first line center. In all honesty, he's absolutely earned it. He has very good defense. He's a very good defensive centerman. And I think this year we've seen him kind of, I don't want to say play poorer defense because he still plays excellent defense, but I think sacrifice a little bit of his defensive play for a little more offensive production. And I think he's really found that nice balance, right? He's playing great defense. He's winning face-offs. He's improved his face-offs quite a bit. He's taking face-offs against significantly better face-off men than he has really his entire career. We started to see him kind of get some of those reps last year with the Bruins. A little bit the year before, but not nearly as much when you're behind a guy like Patrice Bergeron, right? So I really got to give a shout-out to Charlie Coyle. I don't know if this is sustainable. I think, like, what was it? The new year, so 2023, 2024, around January 1st. I think I made a video. I'm not quite sure of the timeline. But I said I don't think this is sustainable with Charlie Coyle. Watching him night in, night out, he's still doing same Charlie Coyle things. But the offensive production is there, and I don't... this might be sustainable. And if so, that's fantastic news for the Bruins. So I think that's kind of a cool story with Charlie Coyle, where he's really found a home and really begin to grow with his role and with his team, and become a very, very good player. He's not elite, he's not a superstar, but he's working just fine as a first-line center, which is incredible. I did not expect him to ever get to this point when he came to Boston in that Ryan Donato trade, which the Bruins clearly won that trade. But it wasn't necessarily a bad trade for Minnesota. They also kind of needed to move on and kind of get rid of some of their core players, and they made a bunch of trades that didn't have a whole lot of return. But anyway, Pavel Zacha I want to talk about next. Zacha, yeah, we expected more offense from him. That's just, it is what it is. He has the offensive talent, but the finishing, not necessarily there. He's not, with that being said, he hasn't been poorly performing offensively, but you want more, especially a guy playing in the top six, especially a guy who's played on a line with David Pastrnak for like 94% of games or something this year, something crazy. You want a little more offense. You want a little more goal scoring, maybe. Pastrnak, not just a great shooter, but a great passer as well, a great setup man. So you want a little more, but Zacha, his defensive play has taken, I think it's taken a massive leap. Now, it was good last year, but I think it's been great this year. Even if he's not involved in the offense, he's still playing very good defensive hockey. And that is what the Bruins need to do to make a play. Well, they'll probably make the playoffs, but to make a run in the playoffs, they need to play that defensive style of hockey first. They don't have the weapons that a lot of the other teams that are going to make the playoffs have. I'm a Bruins fan, and it kind of hurts me to say that, but it's true. They definitely have some weapons, but they rely on their depth, and they rely on defensive hockey. They rely on these lower scoring games to win. And honestly, that's okay. We saw the Islanders do that a few years ago and make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. So it can work for you, but you really have to buy into the system, and the Bruins have done that. Good transition to team play. The Bruins will stay competitive and stay in games when some of their guys are playing 60 minutes of hockey. And you have the same handful of guys that play 60 minutes of hockey every single night. Right? Brad Marchand, Charlie Coyle, McAvoy, for example. Whatever goaltender is in net, Allmark Swayman. You have these guys that will play a full 60 minutes every night. But when you get the full 60 minutes from the entire team, it really pushes them over the edge. Guys like Matt Grzelcyk. Matt Grzelcyk in this game played very well. Played very good defensive hockey, made smart, simple passes, whereas the previous game against Calgary, he was horrible. He was not good. There was no offense, or there was no offense to his game, and he was making horrible defensive decisions that led to turnovers and scoring chances against. The team play, when everybody's playing, they can compete with the best. But when everybody's not playing, they really need to rely on their defense to win games. The hitting, again, this isn't a team that's going to drop the gloves regularly. You have maybe two, three guys that are capable of doing that. But for the most part, this isn't a team that's going to get fighting majors. But they can hit. They have big bodies. They have defensive bodies. They can take hits. They can give hits. Again, they're not going to fight, but they can hit and play that physical brand of hockey, that physical, punishing, defensive brand. And that really kind of, I'm just repeating myself, that I think that leads to success in this league. I also want to talk about kind of the consistency in play over the years. And we talk about vintage Bruins hockey, defensive, hitting. The system is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And when you have a core of players, like a pretty significant core, a lot of these guys have played together, not just this year, but last year, the year before. Some of these guys have been on this team for a while and know the system very well. You go into the offensive zone, nearly the same, I guess it doesn't really matter, offense, defensive, neutral zone, but you know where guys are, you know where they should be. If there's no options, you know exactly where to dump the puck off, so your team has a good chance of getting that. That helps a lot. Having that consistency and understanding of where your teammates should be, what the system is, where they will end up being, really helps push this team up a notch in terms of their play. And we see that a lot. We saw this probably wasn't the best game for it, but we would see blind passes coming over the blue line into the offensive zone, blind passes, and then you just see some random defenseman come up and drive up into the zone, and some players are cycling back, and it's like it's almost a drawn-up play. And it could be. I don't have that insight. It very well could be. But things like that happen, and they're always so different from each other, and they always find a way to make it work and sustain offensive pressure and attack. It's impressive. So I think that helps. Allmark Swayman, who is the starter? I don't know. Swayman overall, I do think, has been the better goaltender this year. Both Swayman and Allmark have had their ups. They've had their downs, though their downs haven't lasted all that long or been all that severe. Ullmark with a 4-0 shutout against the Canucks. He looked fantastic last night. He made some huge saves. Not last night, Thursday. We've seen that from Swayman as well. It's a good tandem. It's probably the best in the league. But if you're going to the playoffs, who's your starter? Do you rotate goalies? We've seen some teams do that, and lately there hasn't been a lot of success for that. But it looks like Swayman's the starter, but Ullmark might reclaim that, right? Swayman looks to be a Vezina finalist at this point in the season. Ullmark, Vezina winner last year, right? So who do you go with? I don't know. I also want to give a shout out to JT Miller of the Vancouver Canucks. First 10 minutes, he was locked in. He was hitting. He was being aggressive. He was getting under the skin of the Bruins a little bit. The Bruins aren't really into letting the other team get under their skin, but he was he had some shots. He was playing excellent hockey, and then he started to get frustrated. Right, we saw him in the first period on the way back end of the screen because I'm not in the Boston area anymore. I can't go to the game. But we saw him slam his stick on the boards. He was by far the last one entering his own defensive zone. I think he was going for a line change. And just taking his time skating up. And since then, he absolutely disappeared from that game. That is a guy that emotions are a part of the game, but you also have to have that short-term memory, right? You have to go out and you have to make a difference. You're down by, two goals at that point. You need to make an effort to get back into it. There's plenty of game left. There's plenty of offensive firepower on the Canucks. I think that definitely hurt the morale of the Canucks a bit. But it wasn't just JT Miller. There was a lot of frustration with the Canucks. They were essentially suffocated in the offensive zone. The Bruins defense suffocated them pretty well. So that was impressive. Brad Marchand, too, I got to give a shout out to him as well. I don't know how this guy just he's like the Energizer Bunny. He's really good at getting under the other team's skin, right? But he's smart about it, right? And he's got these incredible stick handling skills. He's got great vision. He's got a good shot. This guy is aging so well. He's aging just like Patrice Bergeron. Like, he's getting better with age. Marchand also incredible defensively. So I do have to love him or hate him. I do have to give him a shout out for the incredible play he brings, the leadership, and when I say play, I mean 200-foot play, end to end. He is working his butt off every single game. He's one of those guys that gives that full 60 minutes effort. So that's really what I want to talk about. It kind of spawned because I want to talk about how awesome Dakota Joshua was in this game. He was fantastic, start to finish. I think he's the only Canucks player that gave a full 60-minute effort. I want to talk about Quinn Hughes because I see a lot of stuff on YouTube by a lot of prominent hockey creators or whatever about how good some of these guys are defensively, and reality is that they're not, and that's okay. Nobody's saying that's a bad thing or they need to be better because clearly it's a balance, right? But I did want to throw that out there. If you go back, you'll watch Quinn Hughes throughout this game. You just follow him. You'll begin to understand where I'm coming from. I want to talk about Coyle and kind of his maturation and growth into a number one center at this point. Now, is he? I wouldn't say Coyle is the ideal number one center. I think it's a very replaceable position. But considering where the Bruins are at in terms of the cap, in terms of their roster, in terms of the standings, I think he's done an outstanding job with the role he's been given. And I don't think he's necessarily looked out of place, which is hard to do because, throughout his entire career, we've seen him kind of pushed into those positions, and he's totally looked out of place. That has not been the case this year. So I really wanted to give a shout-out to Charlie Coyle. And Pavel Zacha. I wasn't high on Pavel Zacha when he came to the Boston Bruins. I still wasn't all that high with him, even with the Czechia line. Right, you have David Krejci, one of the best playmakers in hockey, in my opinion. One of the most underrated playmakers, and underrated, making $7 million a year, whatever. And I don't align with David Pastrnak, who is one of the most elite scorers in the entire game. You're going to get points by default being on that line. But Zacha doesn't necessarily look out of place But I don't know. I think his game, just like Charlie Coyle's, has grown. And I think they've grown in very different ways, but at the same time, both ways that really help this Bruins team be successful. So that is my little rant on the Canucks Bruins game. I appreciate you for watching. Let me know how you feel. If you have there's plenty to talk about in this game. Like I could totally talk about this game for like an hour, hour and a half, just nonstop. But I'm not gonna do that because I don't even want to listen to that. Like I don't gotta no. So if there's anyone I missed, like throw that in the comments. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about the rematch that's going to happen? What, in a week from now? Maybe 2 weeks? I think a week. I think I don't know. It's coming up. It's on a Saturday night in Vancouver. They're going to have the rematch. I think it's going to be a lot closer. I think the Canucks will come out playing a lot harder. We'll see what happens, but that should be an interesting, fun game to watch as well. I don't know if that will have the playoff feel. It might. We'll see, but I'm excited. Let me know who you think wins that game. I also do want to say, before I let you guys go, this was a weird game for the Vancouver Canucks. They did not play their game for a majority of this game. They are a better team than how they looked, and they've been playing a lot better, top to bottom, start to finish, than they did against the Bruins on Thursday night. I also think this is one of the better, if not probably the best game the Bruins have played all season long, which is encouraging. If they can play like that going into the playoffs, they're going to be a tough team to beat. But as it stands, even as a Bruins fan, I still do have my doubts about how far they can go in the Stanley Cup playoffs with their current roster. So, all right, that's all I got. I'm going to stop talking. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. All right, take care, all right?